You've ever done something perfectly reasonable, like changing your bank details, only to come home and find your family acting like you just set the house on fire? Well, let me tell you about the day. I changed my pension card and accidentally gave my daughter and son-in-law the shock of their lives. Trust me, you'll want to stick around for this one because what happened next had even me questioning reality. It's a sunny Tuesday morning, the kind where the light just pours through the kitchen window and makes everything look a little more hopeful. I'd already had my coffee, 2 cups actually. Because I'm not a rookie and I was feeling that rare burst of energy that only comes around once in a blue moon. You know the feeling, right? When you wake up and think, today I'm going to tackle that thing I've been putting off for months. For me, that thing was updating my bank details for my pension. Not exactly skydiving, but at my age, it's about as thrilling as it gets. Now, let me set the scene. My old bank card had been giving me trouble for weeks. The magnetic strip was worn down, the numbers were fading. And every time I tried to use it, the ATM would beep at me like I'd just committed a federal offense. I'd been meaning to get it sorted, but you know how life gets: doctor's appointments, grandkids, soccer games, and, let's be honest, a healthy dose of procrastination. But that morning, I decided enough was enough. I grabbed my purse, put on my business shoes, and marched down to the bank. Walking into the bank always makes me feel a little out of place, like I'm stepping onto a spaceship. Everything is so shiny and modern. And the young people behind the counter look like they were born after the internet was invented. But I squared my shoulders and took a deep breath. I was on a mission. The lady at the counter, her name was Brenda, and she had the patience of a saint, smiled at me as I explained what I needed. "No problem at all, ma'am," she said, and I could tell she meant it. She walked me through the process, step by step, never once making me feel silly for asking questions. I had to fill out what felt like a small novel's worth of paperwork, sign my name so many times I thought my hand would cramp, and answer security questions that made me question my own memory. What was the name of my first pet? Was it Muffin or Fluffy? I swear these questions are harder than the Sats. Brenda handed me my new card with a flourish, like she was presenting me with a trophy. "You're all set," she said, and I couldn't help but feel a little proud of myself. I'd navigated the labyrinth of modern banking and come out the other side victorious. Who says you can't teach an old dog new tricks? I walked out of that bank feeling like a tech genius, ready to take on the world, or at least the grocery store. As I strolled back to my car, I couldn't help but chuckle at how something so simple could feel like such a big accomplishment. When did life get so complicated? I remember when you could just walk into a bank, talk to a real person, and walk out with what you needed. Now, there are passwords, PINs, security codes, and enough paperwork to wallpaper your living room. But I did it. I conquered the beast. And I was feeling pretty darn good about myself. But here's the thing about life. It's just when you think you've got it all figured out, it throws you a curveball. As I drove home, I started thinking about all the times I'd tried to do something simple, only to have it spiral into chaos. Like the time I tried to set up the Wi-Fi and accidentally turned off the entire house's internet for a week. Or the time I tried to bake a simple birthday cake for my granddaughter and ended up with something that looked like a science experiment gone wrong. Have you ever had one of those days where you start out with the best intentions and somehow everything just goes sideways? I was still riding the high of my banking victory when I pulled into my driveway. The sun was shining, the birds were singing, and I was already planning to treat myself to a nice cup of tea and maybe a little slice of cake. I figured I'd earned it. After all, it's not every day you outsmart the banking system. I even thought about calling my daughter Megan to brag a little, just a little, about how I'd handled everything on my own. But something told me to wait. Maybe it was the way the air felt a little too still. Or maybe it was just that sixth sense you develop after raising kids and grandkids. Whatever it was, I had no idea what was waiting for me inside as I gathered my things and headed for the front door. I couldn't help but feel a little smug. I'd done something good for myself, something responsible. I was taking charge of my own affairs, making sure my pension would keep coming in without a hitch. What could possibly go wrong? Really, how complicated could it be to change a bank card? But as I turned the key in the lock, I had this funny feeling in the pit of my stomach. You know, the uh-oh, what did I forget? Feeling. I brushed it off, chalking it up to nerves. After all, I've done everything by the book. What could possibly go wrong? Little did I know the real adventure was just about to begin. I pulled into the driveway, still humming the tune that had been stuck in my head since the bank. The sun was shining, the air was crisp, and I was feeling on top of the world. But as I turned off the engine, I noticed something that made me pause. Megan's car was parked right in front of the house. Now, don't get me wrong, I love seeing my daughter. But she usually calls before dropping by, and it was the middle of a workday. I shrugged it off, figuring maybe she was in the neighborhood or needed to borrow a cup of sugar, though, knowing her. It was more likely she needed to borrow my vacuum or ask for help with her latest Pinterest project. Still, I didn't think much of it as I gathered my purse and the new bank card, feeling a little proud of myself all over again. As I walked up the steps, I could hear voices inside, raised voices at that. My heart did a little flip-flop. Was something wrong? Had something happened to one of the grandkids? I hurried to the door, fumbled with my keys, and pushed it open, bracing myself for whatever family drama might be brewing. But nothing could have prepared me for the sight that greeted me. There, in the middle of my living room, stood Megan and her husband Eric, looking like they'd just come from a disaster movie. Megan's face was redder than a tomato, her eyes wide and wild, and Eric looked pale as a sheet, clutching his phone like it was a lifeline. They both turned to me the second I stepped inside. And I swear, if looks could kill, I'd have dropped right there on the welcome mat. Before I could even say hello, Megan exploded. "Are you crazy?" She shrieked, her voice echoing off the walls. Eric almost had a heart attack at the ATM. I blinked, completely thrown off. I looked from her to Eric, who was still breathing heavily, and then back to her. "What on earth are you talking about?" I managed, still standing there with my purse dangling from my arm, feeling like I'd just walked into the wrong house. Megan threw her hands in the air, pacing back and forth like a caged tiger. "He went to get some cash for you, like you asked last week, and your card was declined." "Declined, Mom. He thought someone had stolen your pension, or that you'd been hacked." Or she broke off, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and fear. Eric finally found his voice, though it was barely more than a whisper. I tried 3 times, and every time the machine just spat the card back out. I thought maybe I'd put in the wrong PIN, but then I called the bank and they said the card was no longer active. I thought he stopped, shaking his head, as if the memory was too much to bear. I stood there, trying to process what they were saying. It took me a moment, but then it hit me. Of course. I'd changed my bank details, gotten a new card, and the old one was now useless. It was all perfectly logical, at least to me. But to them, it must have looked like a disaster. I almost laughed, but one look at their faces told me that would be a very bad idea instead. I tried to keep my voice calm and steady. I changed. "My bank details today," I said, holding up the shiny new card like a peace offering. "The old card doesn't work anymore because my pension is going to this one now. That's all. No one's been hacked, and no one's stolen anything." For a moment, there was complete silence. Megan stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Eric just blinked, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. I could see the wheels turning in their heads, trying to make sense of it all. Finally, Megan let out a long, shaky breath. "You changed your bank details?" she repeated, as if she'd never heard of such a thing. "Without telling us." I couldn't help myself. I let out a little laugh. "Well, I didn't think I needed to send out a press release. It's my pension, after all. I just wanted to make sure everything was up to date." Eric sank onto the couch, his head in his hands. "I thought you'd been scammed," he muttered. I was ready to call the police. I felt a pang of guilt, seeing how worried they'd been. But at the same time, I couldn't help but feel a little annoyed. When did I become someone who needed to check in with her kids before making a simple change at the bank? I'm not helpless after all. I've been managing my own affairs for decades. Still, I reached out and patted Megan's arm. I appreciate that you care, I said gently, but I promise I'm not losing my marbles just yet. She gave me a weak smile, but I could see the relief in her eyes. Next time, just let us know, okay? We were so scared. I nodded, feeling a mix of emotions, pride, frustration, and a little bit of amusement. Deal, I said. But only if you promise not to stage a full-blown intervention every time I do something responsible. We all laughed then, the tension finally breaking. As I looked at my family, I realized that, for all the chaos, it was nice to know they cared. Even if they did have a flair for the dramatic. But as I settled in with them, couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. After all, in this family, even the simplest things have a way of turning into an adventure. As the three of us stood in the living room, the air thick with the kind of tension you could slice with a butter knife, I finally got the full story out of Megan and Eric. It was almost comical, really. The way a simple change at the bank had set off a chain reaction worthy of a soap opera. Eric, bless his heart, had decided to do me a favor that morning. He remembered I'd mentioned needing some cash for the church bake sale. And since he was already running errands, he thought he'd save me a trip to the ATM. Now, I have to admit, he's always been a thoughtful one, sometimes a little too eager to help, but his heart is in the right place. So there he was, standing at the ATM, my old bank card in hand, probably whistling to himself, thinking he was about to earn some serious brownie points with his mother-in-law. But then, disaster struck. The machine spat the card back out with a cold mechanical beep. He tried again, more slowly this time, as if maybe the card just needed a little extra love. But no luck. Declined. He checked the card, checked the screen, checked the card again. Still nothing. By the third try, he was sweating bullets, convinced he'd somehow broken the machine, or worse, that my account had been emptied by some faceless scammer halfway across the world. He called the bank's customer service line, and after a maze of press 1 for this, press 2 for that, he finally got a real person on the line who told him, quite matter-of-factly, that the card was no longer active. That's when the panic really set in. He called Megan, who was in the middle of a meeting, and from what I gathered, he didn't exactly keep his cool. She told me later that he sounded like he was reporting a kidnapping. Your mom's card isn't working. The bank says it's deactivated. What if she's been scammed? What if someone's stolen her pension? She dropped everything, grabbed her keys, and raced over to my house, calling him every 5 minutes for updates. By the time I walked through the door, they'd worked themselves into a full-blown frenzy. Convinced I'd been robbed, scammed, or worse now. I know I should have felt bad for putting them through all that, but honestly, the whole thing was so absurd I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. I mean, really, one little change at the bank, and suddenly I'm the star of a true crime documentary. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady and calm, and said, "Relax, you too. I just changed my bank details today. My pension's on a new card now. No one's been robbed except maybe me by the price of groceries these days." For a split second, they just stared at me, their faces frozen in shock. And then, as if on cue, both of them went pale. Their eyes rolled back and they fainted. I kid you not, down. They went like 2 sacks of potatoes, right there in my living room. I stood there, purse still in hand, completely dumbfounded. Should I call 911? Should I make them a cup of tea? Maybe both. I'd never seen anything like it. I mean, I've seen my share of family drama, but this was a new one. I knelt down beside them, checking to make sure they were breathing. Thank goodness, they were just out cold, not in any real danger. I grabbed a couple of throw pillows and tucked them under their heads, then went to the kitchen to fetch a damp washcloth. As I dabbed their foreheads, I couldn't help but shake my head and chuckle. All this over a bank card, I muttered. If only they knew what real emergencies looked like. Try raising 3 kids on a shoestring budget in the 80s. Now that was stressful. After a few minutes, Megan started to stir. She blinked up at me, looking dazed and confused, like she'd just woken up from a bad dream. "Mom," she croaked, "is it really just a new card?" I smiled and nodded, holding up the shiny new card for her to see. That's all it is, sweetheart. I promise. No scams, no hackers, just me trying to keep up with the times. Eric groaned and sat up, rubbing his head. I thought I was going to have to call the police, he said, his voice still shaky. Or the FBI, or both. I laughed, finally letting myself enjoy the absurdity of the situation. Well, I appreciate the concern, but next time, maybe just ask me before you jump to conclusions. I'm not quite ready for a Netflix documentary about my missing pension. We all sat there for a moment, the tension slowly melting away, replaced by a kind of giddy relief. Megan started to giggle. Then Eric, and soon we were all laughing so hard we had tears in our eyes. It felt good letting go of all that worry and fear, and just being together. Even if it was over something as silly as a bank card, as I made us all a cup of tea. Because, let's be honest, there's nothing a good cup of tea can't fix. I realized that maybe this was just what we needed. A little scare, a little laughter, and a reminder that no matter how old we get, life still has a few surprises up its sleeve. And as I handed them their mugs, I couldn't resist one last joke. Next time I change my bank details, I'll send out a family newsletter. Or maybe just a group text. They groaned, but I could see the smiles on their faces. And in that moment, I knew everything was going to be just fine. When Megan and Eric finally came to, blinking up at me from the living room rug like two confused turtles flipped on their backs, I couldn't help but burst out laughing. I know, maybe not the most sympathetic reaction, but after the morning I'd had, it was either laugh or cry. And honestly, the sight of them sprawled out, still reeling from the shock of my new bank card, was just too much. I handed them each a glass of water and tried to stifle my giggles, but it was no use. Next time, maybe ask before you panic, huh? I teased, giving Megan a gentle nudge. She rolled her eyes, but I could see the corners of her mouth twitching, fighting back a smile. Eric just shook his head, still looking a little green around the gills, but even he managed a weak chuckle. We all sat there for a moment, letting the absurdity of the situation sink in. The living room, which had been a war zone of worry and wild theories just minutes before, was now filled with the kind of laughter that only comes after a good scare. I poured us all some tea because, as every woman over 50 knows, there's nothing a hot cup of tea can't fix, and we settled in around the kitchen table. The tension melted away, replaced by a warm, familiar comfort. It was one of those moments where you realize that no matter how old your kids get, they'll always worry about you. And apparently they'll always assume the worst before asking a single question. As we sipped our tea, Megan finally broke the silence. "I'm sorry, Mom," she said, her voice soft but sincere. We panicked. I guess we're not used to you making big changes without telling us." I smiled, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "Honey, changing my bank card isn't exactly running off to join the circus. I just wanted to make sure my pension kept coming in. I didn't think it was headline news." Eric, still a little sheepish, chimed in. "I just wanted to help. I thought I was doing you a favor." I patted his hand too. "I know you did, and I appreciate it. But next time, maybe check with me before you call the FBI, okay?" That got a real laugh out of both of them, and I could feel the last of the tension finally slip away. But being the mother that I am, I couldn't resist a little payback. After all, if they were going to treat me like a helpless old lady, I might as well have a little fun with it. So I leaned in, lowering my voice to a conspiratorial whisper. I've been thinking about taking up skydiving. Or maybe getting a tattoo. What do you think?" The look on their faces was priceless. Megan's eyes went wide, and Eric nearly choked on his tea. I burst out laughing again, waving my hands. I'm kidding, but see? This is what happens when you jump to conclusions. One day it's a new bank card, the next you'll have me running off to Vegas with a rock band." We all laughed until our sides hurt, and I could see the relief in their eyes. They knew I was still me, just a little more tech-savvy than they gave me credit for. As the afternoon wore on, we found ourselves swapping stories about other times we'd overreacted or misunderstood each other. Megan confessed to the time she thought her son's science project was a bomb. It was just a baking soda volcano. And Eric admitted he once called animal control because he thought a raccoon was stuck in their attic, only to find out it was just a loose vent cover rattling in the wind. We laughed until we cried. And I realized that these little moments of chaos and confusion are what make family life so rich and memorable. But underneath the laughter, there was a lesson too. I've realized that as much as I value my independence, it's okay to let my family in on the little changes in my life. Not because I need their permission, but because it gives them peace of mind. And maybe, just maybe, it saves us all from a few unnecessary heart attacks. At the same time, I hope they learn that I'm still capable of handling my own affairs, that sometimes a little trust goes a long way. So ladies, here's my question for you. Have you ever done something totally normal, only to have your family act like you've lost your marbles? Maybe you rearranged the living room and your husband thought you'd been robbed. Or you tried a new recipe and your kids called it experimental cuisine. I know I can't be the only one whose family jumps to wild conclusions at the drop of a hat. Drop your stories in the comments side. Love to hear them. After all, if we can't laugh at ourselves and our families, what's the point? And if you enjoyed this little adventure, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. I've got plenty more stories where this came from because life after 50 is anything but boring. Stay tuned, stay fabulous, and remember, sometimes the scariest thing you can do is just update your bank card.